Good evening, everybody. So today we have Ms. Soumya Tiwari, a doctoral research scholar in the domain of international business at Ford School of Management, New Delhi. Soumya has completed her bachelor's degree in political science from Maitri College, University of Delhi, and master's degree in political science with a specialization in international relations from University of Delhi. Additionally, Soumya has a diploma in international affairs and diplomacy from Confederation of Young Leaders. She has authored a book titled The Voice of Soul, which is a collection of her quotes and poetries. At the corporate front, she has employed in the marketing and communications research department as an assistant manager, where she worked on specific client-centric automated projects. She has also great passion for learning languages. Soumya is proficient in French and Russian language and has acquired diploma in both the languages from School of Foreign Languages, Ministry of Defense. Soumya currently serves as a deputy head of academics at the International Association for Political Sciences Students, Montreal, Canada. Soumya previously served as two-term of the chair for Asia and Ocean Student Research Committee, IEPS. Her research interests include emerging markets, political risk, geopolitics, multinational enterprises, corporate politics, activities, trade, and multilateralism. She has presented her research papers in several conferences of repute, both at the national and international levels, such as Academy of International Business, Annual Conference in Seoul, South Korea, European International Business Academy, and the most recent one was the Academy of International Business, which was held in annual conference in the United States of America. Further, at the AIB, she has also served as a reviewer to review manuscripts for these annual conferences. Wholeheartedly, we welcome you, Soumya, for this amazing book review. And without wasting up time, we request you that you please initiate this book review, and floor is all yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Amin, for such a very warm introduction. Without much ado, I'll just begin today's book review. So, today's book discussion basically, it's a review that I'll be presenting of the recent book that I had read. So, it is titled as The Fractured Age: How the Return of Geopolitics Will Splinter the Global Economy by Neil Shearing. So I'll just add two lines about the author. So Neil Shearing serves as the Chief Economist Officer in the capital market, and he has been previously working on the macroeconomic issues and the microeconomic issues. His recent book is has plethora of information, which is the fractured age, and how he focuses on geopolitics. We'll delve deeper into the discussion. Now, I'll start my book review presenting the historical background and then tracing different snippets and perspectives that has been covered in different chapters. So, if you see that for the last 3 decades, um, uh, decades in the terms starting from the Cold War era, there has been a very dominant narrative. Now, when I say a very dominant narrative, it has been in terms of international foreign policy, international relations, and during the period of Cold War, both the dimensions of uh, uh, and the foreign policy and the economics of the countries was in convergence. Now, why do we say that? That time there were a couple of articles because globalization had already started. Globalization had in some of the countries, and emerging markets were very late to witness, specifically in India, which was in the year 1991. And there were articles titled as "The World Was Becoming Flat." Now, why we could understand that the world was becoming flat? It was the borders were blurring. There was movement of migration, movement of people from moving from one place to another. Supply chains were globalizing, and the logic of efficiency and the shareholder perspective. Shareholder, when I say, it's also the stakeholders involved. Your interest in the institutional frameworks, your interest in the societal framework, in the economic framework, was very important, and how it kind of edged over power politics and the national integrity of different countries. So it was an era where author has talked about that it was the fractured age, which in my terms, meant that it was the great complacency uh, between the nations that has been broken. So when I read this book, the first thought after crossing over few chapters came into my mind that it's a very powerful narrative. And when I say powerful, it's very dominating in terms of because the author put forward its arguments. So this book is a very timely publication as well, because it addresses what we are currently also issues addresses the issues that we're currently facing in the multipolar world order, which is a tripartite triangle between some of the countries. And it also traces I really like the idea how it traces its roots from the when US was the only power in the unipolar world. So you understand, we shift from a unipolar world to a multipolar world, and how the tripartite triangle is playing a very, very convincing role is very, very important. The central premise further is again a very, very promising part of the book, which is very persuasive. It talks about the age of hyperglobalization. And when we say that the age of hyperglobalization, so hyperglobalization by that time had already been over, and we were entering a new fractured episodic where geopolitics came into a picture. So geopolitics primarily being indicated as a study of a population, and how it systematically assesses, examines, or reshapes narratives of different countries. And this is a very core idea on which the book has been built. The book further has, over the when I say passing over few chapters, when I was reading different chapters of the book, has structured in three compelling ways. The first one, I found it very, very meticulous, because it really dismantled the idea of the formulation of the perspective on the post Cold War order. Now, author does present a perspective, rather a very powerful one, that how the era of globalization, which we talk about, which we usually debate around uh, while reading in our courses during bachelor's or master's, that how globalization was not just only a permanent state of affairs, but also it was considered as a historical anomaly. And it was made only possible during the time when we were seeing a shift in a unipolar moment, and great powers were on the rise that time. So uh, it also integrates this example by how American hegemony, as I also quoted earlier, that it was enjoying its supremacy in the unipolar world, and how a strategic decision now we see where uh, powers like Russia, India, US, China are coming and forming a tripartite triangle at different forums, and how strategic decision by China to be integrated into a Western-led system is also a kind of a geopolitical aspect that has been acquired in the foreign policy. Now, with this example, we have surely reminded that we are on a very, very fragile consensus. Now, why do I say that? On one hand, we do have developed economies playing their part. And on the other hand, we do have emerging markets who are trying to also assert their own position. They're trying to assert their own supremacy. They are actually also trying to understand the power of geopolitics, how it can be done, like how countries are indulging into um, entering into the geopolitical game so that they can also have their own uh, have their own advantage. They can ensure their position of competitive advantage, and that is how the businesses are also keen to work. So it is, you see, it is not just idea built on a fractured age, but idea that is centering around geopolitics, which has also been seen as a very pivotal force of dominance and very pivotal force of driving the forces in the economic world order. The second and the most impactful yet section of the book, which I really found in further chapters how the author has mentioned the uh, you know very tiny peculiar details about how geopolitics has been moving beyond the headlines about trade wars and sanctions to outline what do you call a multi-layered process of decoupling or de-risking. Now, this also dates me back to the example when on April 2, 2025, President Donald Trump had actually imposed discounted reciprocal tariffs on different sectors, and certain sectors were also excluded. Does that mean that only while the tariffs was on certain sectors, we did not witness a loss on economy or on the other countries? That's not rather a question, but a statement which we witnessed, or an argument that even though the tariff was imposed in certain sectors, we really incurred a huge loss on our economy. So the trade wars, the sanctions, it's all geopolitics, and this is a geopolitical risk amalgamated with a sentiment of political risk, as evident in the case of United States. And that is what rightly the author has also pointed out in his book, that these headlines are just not about tariffs. It is about how we perceive, how we view, and how there's an inclination of geopolitics involved in it. Whether countries are advantaging their position or they are at a disadvantage, at both the ends, there is geopolitics. One is gaining or the other is losing. So it's a game. It's a geopolitical game. Further, moving beyond the tariffs, it's there's also issues about balkanization of technology, reshoring, friendshoring, critical supply chains, which has been very, very, very much prevalent in terms of China, US, and specifically in India. That how both emerging markets, China and India, have been trying to restructure its regional supply chains, all the global supply chains for that matter. It also focuses on how we need to have the mechanism and the framework in place in order to ensure the weaponization of the international or multilateral institutions, which could be IMF. It requires a very financial infrastructure which could help the emerging market and the least developed economies as well. Further, in advancing to when I talk about the technology aspect, when I also talk about the I'm so sorry, I just got muted. So further, it also talks about how we move beyond the aspects of technology. It's the China tech war, or the certain American firms imposing sanctions on different technological firms. So how this amalgamation leads to finally geopolitics is another question of discussion that this book particularly leads you to think very, very critically. And as a student of international relations, it really intrigued me when I was reading this book. So I had a lot of points of discussions, which I'm also mentioning right now, and it'll come uh, in the existing course of discussion as well. And how the looming fragmentation of the global internet and the digital ecosystem of semiconductors, IT, particularly focusing on the IT sector, how the technology has boomed right now, and we see a witness of artificial intelligence as well. So we see the world is also competing on different tech spheres, which is also another level of geopolitics involved in it. So you see, with the level of geopolitics, we are able to harness data, we are able to harness uh, cyber crimes, we are able to analyze everything just in fragment of seconds. So that is how geopolitics is being involved. Now, when we talk about technology, it's more focused on the relations between the US and China, because perhaps we have seen a lot of evidence and the cases in terms of both these countries. And that is how we see that it is very, very pertinent to understand how geopolitics can entirely shape up the perspective of a nation, whether it's a developed market or an emerging market. The As we move beyond the m- moving towards the discussion of the book, that's particular section on discussion points out that there's geopolitics which has splintered the global economy, which entirely means that there has been an impact on businesses, governments, and even the stakeholder. These stakeholders are multifaceted. It's basically not just your government, but it is also it's just not your own government, but also the government responsible uh, or participating in different power politics of other countries. It's the institutional framework, as I mentioned. It is the civil society actors. It is also the corporate leaders. So everywhere, one firm is involved, and the other political stakeholders are also very, 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 very much prevalent in order to understand this dynamics is very, very important. And that is why we say that when there is a geopolitical risk involved in one country, the other nearby economies also incur that loss and they face that risk. So the impact is not just on one economy, but rather on many. And it is very, very huge. So companies thereby need to come up with a strategy so that they can balance out what um, risk they are facing, or how they can balance out their mechanisms or strategies in terms of uh, only able to scale their business. So what happens is, most of the times when countries are facing geopolitical risk, so it becomes very, very difficult for the particular firm. So for example, if a Indian firm has moved to USA to scale up a business, and Indian firm might have faced a geopolitical risk over there. So there might be chances that that particular firm would have a difficulty in investing on a large scale business that had been initially been very easy for that particular firm to do it. So in order to be able to balance very efficiently, it is very, very important and very, very essential. So firms are only advised to have a strategy which is very, very resilient in nature. So in terms of, if you're also facing some kind of political unrest, social instability, labor unrest, and several other factors which might be very political in nature but might not involve that political inclination within itself of that particular factor. So geopolitical compliance and everything plays a very, very important role. And this way, it is very important to also analyze how the policies or the government also play a very, very important role. So sometimes we see that the policies of the government are favoring, sometimes we see that the policies of the government are not favoring towards a particular firm. And there's also a discussion and the pinpoint of how very intriguingly the author mentions about the um, importance of cheap goods, and how there was a time when economies were witnessing low inflation, and hence it was very difficult for the firms to scale their business that time. And even now, if we compare it in the present scenario, some of the economies do face it. But again, geopolitical risk and the major crux of geopolitics varies from one country to the another, and how globalization has been the only driving force uh, for the nations has been kind of revived. But again, we witnessed that there higher cost but slower growth in most of the emerging markets. And therefore, by we say that there needs to be a re-emphasis, re-expansionist power, and the reviving power of the industrial capitalism, which is a driving force for these firms and for these businesses, or even the governments that are involved over there. Because any policy, any mechanism that is being asked, or that is being changed by any of the influential stakeholder, might might or might not, but mostly in the cases of the business, large scale business, it happens that it only leaves them with no option, but rather than divesting from that particular country, which is a host country for them, and hence they end up leaving their business and move to different country of their own choice to have their own business. Further, moving to the concluding remarks, when the author talks about how he also mentions impeccably, and this section is very much favorite for me when I read this book, that how cohesively and with a clear-eyed framework, which is a major strength of this book, talks about how there are problems, but the author actually provides a solution and also weaves them into a probable strategies that firms could also implement. So that is one of the plus points that you would see in the book. The other one is the historical depth and the narrative. So historical depth and the narrative is again a very powerful idea that this book is presenting, not because this book is on global economy, talks about global economy, or it's on geopolitics, but it is also about how it is tracing the narratives right from the Cold War and giving the recent capturing the essence by giving real life examples. So as I mentioned about the discounted reciprocal tariffs, sanctions, and how firms divest. So that is again a very I think a very fruitful idea for a book when you read it. The other is what could be the one actionable insight that I carried away when I read the book was that for every business leader or a policymaker who will read this book will be a very essential guide, not in terms of making them understand what happened in the history, but rather providing them the real picture of how the business economy in the global outlook looks like. Because it's very important to have that idea from the perspective of a practitioner to be able to capture the essence of how you actually move into a business or drive the firms, because that is only then the idea of driving the economy is looks real into the picture. So uh, further, the author also provides a typology of different kind of risk. It's a social, economic, technological, and geopolitical. The critical acclaim is that the person who does not have a very much broader idea of different categorization of these risks prevailing in the countries might not be able to understand particular dimension. However, if you go into depth, if you critically analyze it, you will very well get to know that idea, and you will be able to weave that particular perspective into your own mind. I would say that while the direction of the book, usually when we are writing paper, we are writing a narrative, or we are writing a book, it is usually said that it should be logically coherent. So while moving forward, even though the idea is very convincingly outlined, I really liked how the chapters have been categorized, how the book has been presented. The book, I think, the book could devote more space to potential forces of resilience, by pointing out the examples of uh, what actually indicated the fracture. So, the role of multinational corporations as independent actors, possibility of new stakeholders, how firms are required to maintain cordial relationships with the new stakeholders and other than the governmental forces. So, this is, I think, a powerful idea which could also be weaved into analyzing a story or analyzing a discussion while reading this book. While I have mentioned couple of times in my discussion as well that it's very intuitive. It's very comprehensive. It's very discussive. It's very elaborative. I think this book by Neil Shearing is a very much essential read for all the IR scholars. Again, not only because of the geopolitics or the global economy, because it really presents a real essence and the picture to understand the turbulent forces that are driving different risks in the present scenario, and how we are able to examine, assess, and analyze that. It is again a very, very powerful narrative. Therefore, by focusing or emphasizing more on the era of geopolitics, and how what we can learn from it, or what we can unlearn from it, or what we can relearn from it, it's a power game with the all countries. So it really gives you a clear picture. It really gives the clarity to kind of you can prepare yourself with the underlying challenges ahead. Of course, challenges will be multiplexed. There would be multifaceted issues that the countries will be facing. It's not just that, at one end I will face social unrest, and on the other hand I might not face political instability for the 10 years ahead. Political unrest, social instability will always be there, irrespective of anything, irrespective of any policy that comes into the picture. These are micro level issues and they will always be there. But the question is, and the real picture is, that how the global economy emerges victorious in terms of, uh, having its own analysis, having its own mechanisms, and having its own frameworks to masterfully demonstrate it. And that is what I think very powerful the nations are also trying to region, and they should also be solely focusing on should focus on this, because this is going to be an really, really interesting idea. So I think we really need to see on how this world really unfolds a new picture, and how it transitions itself to a new landscape for us to witness this, because I'm really sure that this that as the book is aptly titled, fractured age, we do see that. And at some point we see there are deteriorating home and the host country relations, there's strategic rivalry, there's another issues of investment, issues of large scaling business going on. But yet again, how powers compete in a multifaceted and the tripartite triangle, in a multipolar world where we see that China is also rising as an Asian dragon. India is also trying to come up at the forefront to, be the powerful force in the Asian narrative. So we are yet to witness how this world will unfold, but definitely this book is a very, very, very interesting read, and I must recommend to all the IR and the political science scholars. And not just that, I mean, of course, it's going to be really interesting for all the IR scholars, but it's also going to be interesting other than the people who really loves to read. So I think this is a book, that non-fiction genre, that you could really go ahead to read forward for. That's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Soumya, for this, incredible, providing us with an incredible understanding and giving us something which is actually very much holistic. Uh, Before, having this particular session with you, I also did my homework of reading this particular book, and I got to know about certain concepts, the way you have discussed about globalization, the supply chain disruptions, amid because of this US China tensions, and everything has been actually globally revolving around it. But the points that you have actually given in this particular session is actually very impressive. The reason is it is bringing a holistic perspective to it, because we are not just focusing upon certain geopolitical tensions, certain strategies, focusing on localization and regionalization of businesses pertaining only and open focusing to certain stakeholders. I think it is much more ahead. And because of that, because of my intriguiness and prior audience ask you certain questions, I have three questions for you, and which I have already noted because at the during your session. So my number one question for you would be, so book clearly argues, and this is my understanding about when I read this particular book, that book clearly argues about certain post Cold War era of globalization, which you have also, said in your talk that it was talking about globalization. But was that post-code era of globalization was a historical anomaly? And number one point, I feel that it is a historical anomaly. And what is your opinion about this statement? I think very crucial. So if you could address something about that.
Mm, yeah. Um, Thank you so much, Aman, for a very interesting question. I mean, I need to gather my thoughts. Can I have just 1 minute for that?
Your time, please.
Um, so I think the I think the idea of when you say that the post Cold War era of globalization was historically uh, it was an historical anomaly. I do agree that. And I think it's very much persuasive. This argument, but in particular, is very much persuasive. Now, why do I feel that? Because even while reading the book, by referring to certain snippets, I could understand that. Now, I'll just explain you how we understand this, right? So historically, if you see that, this, as I mentioned, that this argument is very persuasive, periods of intense globalization until the late 19th century have often been followed by different issues, or rising issues such as protectionism, war, geopolitical rivalry. These three are the mega trends that I could really recall at the moment to make your question answerable, to justify your question that you put forward. And the post Cold War moment, which was a unipolar moment in the world history under the hegemony of the United States of America, it actually combined the inclusion of also the unique inclusion of the WTO, World Trade Organization, with American putting that idea first, and also giving a way for China to enter that multilateral institution. And now, viewing this period right now at present, I think we are in a state of dilemma. Why do I say that? We are in a state of dilemma because until the unipolar hegemony, when the US was in power in the unipolar world, that was the only rising power, and it was the only country which was pushing forward for having an institution like multilateral institution like WTO, right? And now it's the only country who is keen to revamp its structure, to break down the entire structure of WTO. Why? Perhaps following two reasons for that. This is primarily because of one is that the institution is not following on the basis of the interest of the American state. Second, the interest that the emerging markets or the least developed economies needed are not being fully addressed. Hence, these are the two powerful reasons, that we see that we are also in a dilemma right now. And that is why I have always been focusing in most of my debates or opinions that, you know, multilateral institutions are a threat right now. They are in the state of threat. What is the future of multilateral institutions? We are still in the existential crisis right now. So we really need to work on that. And how the reassertion of geopolitics is getting that is interlinkage back with the historical narrative is again a crucial thing that we are looking forward to witness. So yes, it's an argumentative idea. It's an argument which is very, very dominant in nature, but yet we are yet to witness how the institutional framework drives the whole force with the notion of geopolitics.
Thank you so much for answering it in a really amazing manner. I think which is very much captivating to understand about whether it is about in a deeper linkage of globalization with these rapid emerging economies and the developed ones. Now, I will stick to this concept of globalization in a quick, deeper manner. And my second question, follow-up question in this particular aspect would be: is a full splintering the most likely outcome, which is mentioned in the book? And I guess you have also mentioned about the term. Or could we see a concept of managed globalization? So, which could be better in this particular space?
That's again a very tricky yet an interesting question. Now, why do I say tricky? Because it's going to be very opinionated. Uh, one might agree, one might not agree. So I'm just going to talk about my own perspective. I think the book clearly asserts, on the idea of having a definitive splintering, because um, there's a title, fractured age, and how the global economy will splinter the world in the age of geopolitics. So that is again an idea of a book that has been captured in, but the reality is very different. And again, why I say that the reality is very different, because there are driving forces of globalization. It's already happening, but we are not seeing a breakage in pattern of globalization, but rather we are seeing new forces, that are driving the global economy, which is, we could say, the rise of technology, the rise of artificial intelligence. So, and with this rise of security is has been how we are maintaining security in terms of resilient supply chains, or maintaining the global value chain. So, forming um, one end to the final product end. How a particular one assembly thing is happening in one country, and the finished good is made into a different country. So that we are altogether also focusing on five major bases of manufacturing and production. Again, I think the other idea that lies is also about the non-critical services or the consumer goods, which have been also at the overarching idea of global economy because of the geopolitics. And therefore I think it's the need of not managing them but also integrating into the processes. So I think that is going to be the real challenge that we really need to work on.
Oh, thank you so much again for this deep perspective. Now, I think you very clearly mentioned about and very nicely bring upon the perspective of managing this deep value chains, global value chains, amid this concept of having, a competitive advantage or putting a competitive edge of one products over others. I think having and mastering this technique of, having global value chains amid supply chain disruptions is very competitive. And I think China or maybe US is actually focusing on that. And that's the new era, new war which is amid about to take place. So very rightly focus upon that, you look putting more emphasis on managed globalization, which is very much important and prominent in the upcoming zone. My last question before we are giving this, I'd be handing over the set of questions to the audience, would be again on very important question that I feel is very important is, so when I was reading this book, the book posits a very crucial point about economic interdependence, right? And it says that economic dependence has actually failed miserably as a guarantor of peace, which has been quoted in the book. So, does this actually mean that nations should actively seek less economic engagement with, strategic rivals, even if it is causing certain self-inflicted economic harms? So, if you could give certain highlight upon, this economic interdependence and rivalries over farms in the countries. Thank you.
I think you did your homework so well that you putting forward such interesting and debate-ish questions that well, are very much opinionated. Anyways, of course the perspective matters. So very rightly you mentioned about the argument, the core premise and the core argument of the book, which is also a theory of commercial peace, and the idea of economic interdependence, which is not just prevalent in the IR domain, but also in the IB domain, in the IB international business domain, where how having deep economic ties within the home country and the host country, or having a strategic rivalry, as you mentioned, within both the countries, makes conflict very easy. you know so any two countries which are embedded in having two very economic deep ties, they might also face conflict with one another. But I think this idea has been really falsified by the recent events. So for example, this could how the energy perspectives, or how Europe had been trying to drive the energy ties, the rising tensions with China, and how also the the interdependence, the core idea of interdependence also did not prevent any aggression, but however it only creates asymmetric vulnerabilities between the nations. So even during the uh, idea of the pandemic had been risen in the year 2020, the Galvan Valley clash, a lot of firms had actually tried to divest and not go for front with China. So that was again a very asymmetric vulnerability. Then of course, since you talked about the economic interdependence, there's also a concept called weaponized interdependence, very very peculiarly dominant in the IR theory, which is a nation can become very very much dangerously or heavily reliant on a rival, right, for critical goods. And we see this right now at the moment. For gains, it is all the geopolitical drive that the nations are having, and to seek their advantage and competitive position. This is mostly done in the case of semiconductors, critical minerals, rare earth minerals, or energy. So in this crisis, this rivalry is there, but it can also give you an advantage. So you understand that that's how this concept of interdependence is being used as a weapon. Trade is being used as a weapon. So this self-inflicted harm of having this notion of decoupling is a very very put has put nations at a very very necessary cost of de-risking and building resilience. So again, this idea of weaponized interdependence is very very much prevalent, as also been argued and has been dominated as a central premise of the book. Now, it's also an illusion, I feel. Now, why do I say that, it's an illusion? Because when nations are continuously deeply economically interdependent or embedded with one another, with some deals or with some, power gains, it is also an fragmentation of illusion, you know, which ensures that, uh, if something is working in favor of a particular country, that might be seen as, it's a peace deal, or it might be a resultant of a mechanism which is driving just a peace. But that not might be possible, because on the other hand, both the countries had been rivals to one another. So how the this illusion can be forged, or this can be you know made much more stronger, because of it could be only by strengthening the economic and the military and the political capabilities. And that will only happen when there are formal level dialogues, where there are formal level diplomacies. Track 1 is there, track 2 diplomacy is there, and thereby only then we can say that there's a harm of less disengagement is being seen between the nations. So yeah, that is all from my side.
Oh, thank you so much for again a very holistic answer, giving different perspective on decoupling, weaponization, and I think based on the discussion that you are saying, I think there would be no surprise for me and the readers that maybe the World War III could have been substituted easily with a Trade War 1, which is the near future, and the proliferation of technology is actually giving it a new edge because every country is actually highly dependent on technology. For example, in case of China, where
Right.
most of the things have been so technically advanced that even the labor involvement, which was highly very large in terms of, in every sector, has been
Right.
completely diminished. Whether it is healthcare, whether it is maybe and defense, whether it is about other sectors. And the key to everything, it depends upon that most of the investments have been attracted to the sectors where there is a heavy dependency on the technology. And your stakeholders, for instance, are not just focused upon whether the two countries are actively globalized, or maybe they do have global engagements, not because of that, but because of how much technologically advanced they are into certain sectors, which only they need. So I think very beautifully portrayed. So thank you so much, Soumya, from my side for these three questions, which I could feel are very important when I go through the book. And after hearing from you, I feel that it is important to understand it from different perspectives which you have given. And now I'm just moving forward to the audience and the group. So if they have any sort of questions for Soumya, you are most welcome to ask, or you can also write it in the chat box. We already have one, I guess. Mariam, just can you please allow Mariam in the room? Shrey, I have not received any request from Mariam. If you could ask her if she can again send me request, I'll add her in. Oh, okay. Anybody for any question for Soumya for this particular session? By the time Shrey is asking Mariam to add, to get herself added in the group. Any questions? I guess we don't have any questions. Uh, and I genuinely hope that readers are very clear by the presentation that you have given. I think that is absolutely phenomenal. So, just as a moderator, it feels privilege and pleasure for me to hear about such insightful thoughts about in this particular topic, which is very much prominent in this specific and leading time of era. So thank you so much, Soumya. And again, I would request all the readers and everybody over there to please purchase this book and read it and gain more insights on it. And we would love to hear more about it via mails or via thoughts, anything. You could personally message also Soumya for that. I hope, Soumya, that's absolutely okay for if you could address any query if they're
Sure.
personally messaging you. So thank you so much for your
Sure.
time.
Sure.
And again, thank you so much all the readers for their time, all the participants who were there with us for their support and for their time. So again, thank you so much for giving everything. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amin, for really moderating this session so well. It was really thought-provoking, and I thoroughly enjoyed having an intellectual course of discussion with you. And thank you to all the fellow participants who actually took time to join this lecture. This was basically one of the most interesting book that I had read very, very recently, and I told Amin that I really want to present a book review on the same. Uh, so thank you so much all for joining in and sparing your valuable time and listening to me. Thank you so much. Means a lot.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.